The Galactic Empire had always viewed Earth as a minor curiosity, a late bloomer among the stars, a primitive species barely climbing out of its gravity well. To the central bureaucrats of the High Council, humans were quaint, rambunctious, irrational, but ultimately unimportant. They had no presence in imperial politics, no navy worth mentioning, and certainly no species-tier weapons. Their recent inclusion in galactic charts had sparked interest among a few academic circles, but no one expected Earth to matter. That changed the day a small extraction team, under the authority of Imperial Intelligence Division, was sent to Earth. Their objective was surgical and simple: gather live human subjects for behavioral study. Specifically, they targeted a group of young females attending an international science symposium. The Empire's biocultural analysts theorized that such individuals will provide a cross-section of human genetics, cognition, and social behavior, particularly given the gathering's emphasis on technology and diplomacy. 12 were taken. Quietly, efficiently, no weapons discharged, no witnesses left conscious. The humans had no chance. The team's extraction vessel left orbit cloaked and undetected, heading straight for a remote Imperial research facility in Sector 19 Vox. The captives awoke not to pain or torture, but to sterile corridors, soft restraints, and observation chambers filled with beings that stared at them as one might examine insects. The humans quickly realized their captors had no interest in communication. Their food was automated, their schedules calculated by artificial means, and the guards, when they did appear, spoke in a language none of the girls recognized. They adapted. Within days, linguistic patterns emerged. Some girls with multilingual backgrounds began to piece together syntax, tone, and intent from overheard conversations. Others tracked routine schedules, identifying weak security points, camera blind spots, and subtle access inconsistencies. They learned. The Empire's researchers mistook silence for submission. The young women, scholars, engineers, linguists, biologists, were cataloging everything. One by one, they began communicating in whispers, scribbles on the walls when they thought no one watched, tiny codes passed through meals and gestures. They pooled what they knew. They didn't know when or how. The first sign that things were no longer proceeding according to plan came when the Empire's sensors, which had long been designed to monitor galactic borders, suddenly began detecting unusual anomalies. Across the Empire, in quiet subspace communication hubs, Imperial fleets received fragmented transmissions, out of place, beyond the norm. At first, the Imperial Intelligence Division dismissed these as glitches or cosmic interference, a fleeting quirk of the stars. Then, the anomalies began to increase, subtle but steady. It started with sporadic power fluctuations in several key facilities across their sector. Soon after, the same disruption occurred on a larger scale. Whole systems went dark. Surveillance satellites lost contact. Imperial subnets scrambled. There was a glitch in the system, a strange, unnerving whisper on frequencies no one could pinpoint. The Empire, for all its arrogance, had never fully accounted for Earth's capabilities. Its commanders had underestimated the humans not just in terms of physical strength, but in their resilience, their adaptability, and their willingness to go to extremes when it came to protecting their own. The abduction was supposed to be simple. Yet the moment the girls were taken, they unknowingly triggered something far more dangerous: humanity's rage. As the sabotage spread, the first human strike emerged. A small, unassuming ship entered Imperial-controlled space under the guise of civilian transport. Its hull was unmarked, its frequency quiet, its trajectory smooth, but it carried within it the deadliest kind of weapon: unpredictability. As it approached a key communication hub, the Empire systems were already strained from the internal breaches. The ship unleashed a devastating EMP pulse, knocking out entire sectors of the Imperial grid. The ship slipped into orbit, unnoticed until it was far too late. When the Empire's fleet scrambled to respond, they found nothing but fragments. Human ships were not designed to fight directly. They were designed to disappear. They were phantoms in the vastness of space, impossible to track, impossible to hit. The small human team left no trace, only the message, "You should have left us alone." The Empire, deeply entrenched in its sense of superiority, began to panic. They believed they could not lose control of the situation, that their technological might was more than enough to quell any revolt. But it was not just sabotage they faced. The humans had begun to infiltrate their systems. From the lowest shipyard to the highest research lab, nothing was safe. The encryption protocols were breached with ease. Surveillance algorithms were twisted. The Empire's very own satellites began to turn against them, sending back distorted data. The truth began to emerge. Humanity was not the simple, unorganized species the Empire thought them to be. It was a species that understood warfare in ways the Empire could not fathom. Guerrilla tactics, psychological warfare, and unpredictable strikes were only the surface of the nightmare the Empire was about to face. The humans weren't just hacking their systems. They were hacking their culture, eroding the sense of control the Empire had relied on for centuries. In the meantime, the girls inside the facility began to realize the full scope of what was happening. They had long since stopped waiting for a rescue. Instead, they began creating one. Using whatever resources they could find, they disabled security cameras, triggered hidden alarms, and even rewired parts of the facility's infrastructure. They moved with silent precision, each step coordinated with the others in ways that even their captors had not anticipated. The Empire had underestimated the humans in their entirety, assuming that they would break under pressure. They did not understand that these women had been raised in a world where survival often meant bending or breaking rules, and they had done so their entire lives. One by one, each girl set her own plan into motion. Some focused on disabling the facility's defenses, others on distracting or misleading the guards. They worked with a terrifying level of coordination, tapping into their collective knowledge and training. They might have been captives in this foreign land, but their minds were sharp. They were quick learners, and they would not be held forever. The most remarkable part of the Empire's failure was its complete inability to comprehend the shift in power. When the first reports of human rebellion started filtering up the chain of command, the response was laughable. The Empire had considered humans an afterthought, mere primitives with no real military might to speak of. So, when the report suggested that the humans were mounting a concerted counteroffensive, it was dismissed as exaggerated propaganda. But as the sabotage continued and the strikes began to hit at the heart of the Empire's operations, the truth became undeniable. Imperial commanders were forced to confront the fact that they had grievously miscalculated. They had invited a force they had no hope of understanding. And now, the reckoning was coming. The response, however, was not immediate. The Empire's arrogance had been built over centuries. Even in the face of mounting evidence, they stubbornly clung to the belief that a few disrupted systems were not a threat. In the interim, the human teams grew bolder, more sophisticated in their operations. Communications silos were compromised. Fleet movements were delayed. And all the while, the message grew louder, clearer. Humanity would not be silenced. The Empire had made a mistake they could not undo. And then came the warning. A signal broadcast across the Empire's networks. It was simple and direct, stripped of any ambiguity. We are coming. We will take back what is ours. No demands, no negotiations, just a statement, a declaration of intent. The impact was immediate. The Empire had not expected this kind of response, let alone this level of coordination. For the first time, they realized that humanity's supposed weaknesses, its unpredictability, its lack of cohesion, were in fact its greatest strengths. The Empire had provoked a force that could never be tamed, never be subdued. And now, they had drawn their first blood. A chain of events had been set in motion, and there would be no going back. The human response wasn't just about revenge. It was about a message. The Empire's forces would soon learn that the humans didn't need to match their power. They needed only to disrupt it. The Empire would soon discover that no amount of technology, no military might, could stand against a species that understood the true nature of warfare. Survival at any cost. The pieces were in motion now. The girls in captivity had given the first signal, the first sign that they would not be cowed. And in doing so, they had set the stage for the Empire's destruction. But this was just the beginning. The real fight, the one that would determine the fate of an empire, was still to come. And humanity, far from the weak, docile species the Empire thought they knew, was ready to prove that the galaxy had vastly underestimated them. Humanity was no longer simply reacting to the Empire's actions. They were taking control. And the Empire had just begun to realize the true magnitude of their mistake. The message had been delivered, but the true weight of its implications hadn't fully settled on the Empire. For the first time, the once untouchable rulers of the galaxy were forced to reckon with a species that had no reason to fear them. The humans weren't just striking back. They were reshaping the battlefield. Every system they targeted, every ship they disabled, each line of communication, they severed added fuel to the growing fire of rebellion. The Empire's once infamous intelligence services now found themselves scrambling to understand a threat they had dismissed as inconsequential. For years, the Empire had manipulated smaller races, quashed insurrections, and extinguished resistance with a swift hand. They understood control. They understood domination. What they didn't understand was humanity's response to adversity. The Empire's arrogance had led them to believe that their technology was enough to ensure supremacy, but humanity was proving them wrong on every level. The Empire's superiority, once a universal truth in their eyes, was now revealed to be nothing more than a fragile facade. The humans, having taken control of various Imperial outposts and data centers, began orchestrating their counteroffensive in earnest. They no longer worked in the shadows, sabotaging the Empire's systems in secret. No, they were now open in their defiance, daring the Empire to retaliate, confident that the balance of power had already begun to shift. In the heart of the Imperial Council, panic was starting to take root. The once proud leaders who had made their careers on outthinking their enemies were now overwhelmed by a truth they couldn't escape. The humans were unlike anything the Empire had faced before. They didn't follow the same rules. They didn't fight the same way. And most terrifying of all, they didn't stop. The Empire's communications hubs were flooded with urgent reports of more attacks, more disappearances, and more disruptions. Entire fleets were left stranded in space, crippled by weapon systems that the Empire couldn't trace or counter. Meanwhile, the humans continued to operate with eerie precision, like ghosts in the dark, leaving their enemies to choke on their own arrogance. The intensity of the human response became even clearer when one of the Empire's military command vessels, the Gloomshear, a flagship of the Imperial Navy, entered a particularly volatile sector. It was meant to be a show of force, a demonstration of the Empire's ability to quell any uprising. Instead, the ship found itself at the center of a harrowing event that would signal the beginning of the end for the Empire's dominance. As the Gloomshear drifted through the sector, its sensors went offline. The ship's systems, once considered impenetrable, suddenly began to malfunction. It wasn't just a localized issue. Every system on the vessel seemed to be falling apart at once. Internal communications failed. Navigation controls were hacked. The weapon systems, once a deterrent to any enemy, were turned against the ship itself. And within minutes, the Gloomshear was drifting in space, helpless and incapacitated. The most chilling part of the attack, however, wasn't the damage to the ship. It was the message that followed. On every Imperial communication channel, a single transmission played on repeat. "You should have left us alone." The transmission was broadcasted with clarity that made it impossible to ignore. It was not just a message to the Empire. It was a symbol of defiance that echoed across the galaxy, a reminder that humanity was no longer beneath their notice. By the time the Empire managed to send a rescue mission to retrieve the Gloomshear, it was too late. The ship had been taken, along with its crew. There was no trace of the humans who had launched the attack, only the overwhelming sense that they were always one step ahead. The attack had been a statement, not just of humanity's capabilities, but of the Empire's vulnerability. And as the Gloomshear drifted in space, its mission logs intact but its crew vanished, the Empire realized with horrifying clarity that this wasn't just a rebellion. It was the beginning of something much larger. The attacks grew bolder. Every day, another system fell to the humans. The Empire's response was predictable. They sent fleets. They dispatched legions. They launched offensives meant to bring the humans to their knees. But with each attempt, they only exposed their weaknesses. The humans had learned the Empire's tactics, anticipated their moves, and countered with strategies that were as ruthless as they were innovative. It wasn't just the Empire's technology that was outmatched. It was their very approach to warfare. The Galactic Empire, a once unstoppable juggernaut, had underestimated the determination of the humans. They had assumed that their advanced fleets and overwhelming firepower would quash any resistance. What they didn't account for was a human spirit, a spirit that would not bend, would not break, and would not be subdued. The humans did not simply fight to survive. They fought to win. They fought for something greater than themselves. They fought because they had seen what happened when civilizations were crushed under the weight of the Empire's ambitions. They fought because they were ready to sacrifice everything to ensure that their kind would never again be the prey. The most harrowing realization for the Empire came when their top commanders were unable to defeat the human tactics. Even their most seasoned generals, with their vast experience, found themselves outmatched and outmaneuvered. The humans had no great armies, no vast fleets, at least not in the traditional sense. What they had was ingenuity, unpredictability, and an unrelenting will to win. And as their attacks continued to disrupt the Empire's operations, it became clear the humans were not a threat to be dealt with, but an unstoppable force that was forcing the Empire to rethink everything. The Empire's desperation grew as they faced a challenge that no military strategist had ever predicted. A species that could not be contained, a species that could not be reasoned with. And as the Empire's war machine ground to a halt, the reality of their situation became painfully clear. They had provoked a force they could not defeat, and now the humans would take what was theirs. The Empire had made the mistake of thinking that strength alone could control the galaxy. They had thought that their dominance, their reach, would never be challenged. But in their haste to crush the humans, they had awakened something far more dangerous. A species willing to rise against them, willing to take whatever it took to win. And now, the Empire would face the consequences of their arrogance. The galaxy, once ruled by fear and might, was about to learn that humanity was not a species to be underestimated. They were a force to be reckoned with. And the reckoning had only just begun.